Hello, good afternoon, and good morning to many of you, and welcome back. My name is Jeremy Leffler. I work in the policy office at the National Science Foundation, and it's my pleasure to welcome you yet again to another session of the Fall 2023 NSF Virtual Grants Conference. And I am now pleased to present this session, which will cover the work of the NSF Office of the Inspector General.
Hello, everybody, and thank you all for attending our discussion on the Office of Inspector General for our portion of the Fall 2023 Grants Conference. My name is Sarah Adams. I am a program specialist over in the Office of Audits, specifically on the contract grant audit team. And I've been in this position for a little over a year now, and I'm going to pass it along to Elisabeth.
Hi, everybody. It's great to be here today. My name is Elisabeth Christensen. I am a senior investigative attorney here at the Office of Inspector General. That is housed, the attorneys are within the Office of Investigation. So I work both with our special agents and with our investigative scientists. We have one of each here today, and I will turn it over to Mike to introduce himself.
Hello, everyone. Thanks for being here today. My name is Michael Collins. I'm a criminal investigator within NSF's OIG's Office of Investigations. I've been with the agency for about 2 years now, and I'm going to go ahead and pass it off to Aliza.
Hi, everyone. My name is Aliza Sacknovitz, and I am the Deputy Director of the Research Integrity and Administrative Investigations Division within the Office of Investigations. I've been with the office for about 17 years now. I think I will just continue on now. All right, so before finding and applying for my current job, I wasn't familiar with what an Office of Inspector General was or what they do. In general, an Office of Inspector General is an independent office that promotes economy, efficiency, and effectiveness. It prevents and detects fraud, waste, and abuse in agency programs and operations. It has full access to records and subpoena power, and it reports to the head of the agency. For us, that's the National Science Board, and to Congress. This presentation will describe what our office does and how we interact with NSF-supported institutions during audits and investigations. We'll conclude with some case study examples. To learn more about our office, you can visit our website, which should pop up on any web search for NSF OIG. I'll now pass it back to Sarah.
Okay, great. So let's get started on talking about what do we do in the Office of Inspector General, or the OIG. So we have two main sides of the house. We have the Office of Investigations, which Mike, Elisabeth, and Aliza will discuss a little later on. And we have the Office of Audits, which is where I work. And so you can imagine in the Office of Audits, we work on audits. We do a lot of audits where the awardee institution is the focus, and we call those our external audits. We also conduct audits of NSF programs to identify ways to improve systems and operations, and we call those internal audits. And sometimes, to really understand the challenge of a program, we have to conduct audit work on a specific award at the awardee institution, and we've been calling these hybrid audits. And we've recently done a few of these. For example, the Established Program to Stimulate Competitive Research, or EPSCoR, and we did one with the Graduate Research Fellowship Program, so GRFP. So today I'm going to focus my discussion around our external audits for specific awardees, so those external audits, and the single audit and quality control assurance reviews, as these are the functions that are probably of most interest to this audience of NSF award recipients. And additionally, as part of our mission to prevent fraud, waste, and abuse, we conduct outreach presentations like this one to help awardees recognize and prevent fraud, administer federal funds, and promote responsible conduct of research. So let's get into how we pick an audit. So as we approach each fiscal year, we come up with an audit plan. And there are, of course, a number of audits that we are required to do by law. And those will be the ones listed in orange on this slide. And there are more discretionary parts of how we come up with our audit plan. And we have to consider a number of factors. So the first things we'll consider are what's in green. And then we will consider what's in blue. And then we will just consider what's in the dark blue, ultimately leading to our complete audit plan, which is found on our website. So then, what kind of audits might you all be involved in? So let's take a minute to talk about the typical audits and reviews that you all may be called upon to participate in. And I know there's a lot on this slide, and I'm about to speak for a second here, but bear with me. So first, I'm going to talk about the external incurred cost audits. So in a given year, we typically complete 20 to 24 external audits. So the OIG will conduct these, or we will contract an independent public accountant firm or an IPA firm to conduct the audit on our behalf. So these audits are not just a review of incurred costs on a single award. Instead, the auditors look at all costs claimed on an NSF award during the audit scope. And then the auditors will use data analytics on the general ledger to identify risk areas across the institution. So a typical incurred cost audit will review financial systems and expenditures. They will then compare drawdowns to the accounting system. And then after the field work is complete by the auditors, we will issue the final report to the auditees and NSF with recommendations for that specific institution. And as I've mentioned earlier, we've also been doing a handful of audits of awardees each year as part of a program-specific audit, such as the EBSCO or the GRFP. And these often focus on areas specific to helping us understand where awardees might need more guidance in unique aspects of a given program. So that's an overview of our external incurred cost audits. So now let's look at those single audit reviews. And as you may know, award recipients that spend $750,000 or more federal funds in a year must obtain a single audit, which is an important oversight tool. So we review the quality of single audits of NSF award recipients for which NSF has audit cognizance. So generally, these institutions receive the majority of their federal funds from NSF. We also review other award recipients when we have concerns about the NSF-related information contained in their single audit reports. So our reviews will determine if the audits complied with federal requirements and the professional audit standards. We use checklists developed by the Council of Inspector Generals on integrity and efficiency, or SIGI, to conduct our reviews. We may also do quality control reviews of the auditor's work. And our quality assurance work helps to ensure that the single audits can be relied on by government agencies and pass-through entities. And so that's a look at the single audit review. So now let's get into understanding the external audit risk model and how every year we pick which audits to look at. So every year we are putting together our annual audit plan. And so we update and run our external audit risk model. NSF awards about 12,000 new awards annually and manages more than 56,000 active awards. And we are an audit office of about 30 people. So as you can imagine, we can't audit everything. We can't have our eyes on everything. So we have developed this risk model to help us focus our resources and select institutions to audit. The basic steps include, first, we'll gather the universe of the NSF awards. Second, we define the population of awardees because we typically select an auditee, not a specific award. And then we will test all costs claimed for a given scope period. The model takes into account a number of factors, including the drawdown pattern, the number and value of NSF awards, as well as external ones. And then additionally, we look at the single audit findings. So we put all of this information together to help us in selecting which institutions to audit. So now let's take a look at the single audit selection process. For 2022, there were nearly 43,500 single audits. These audits covered 1.77 trillion in total federal expenditures, including 6.2 billion in direct NSF expenditures. 69 of the audits fell under NSF cognizance or oversight responsibilities and received a desk review from the OIG. So the NSF OIG aims to select 2 to 3 per year for a quality controlled review. So we consider the auditing firm characteristics to determine which to select for our review. And here I would like to highlight the Governmental Audit Quality Center, or GAQC, which promotes the importance of quality governmental audits and the value of such audits to purchasers of governmental audit services. So GAQC is a voluntary membership center for CPA firms and state audit organizations that perform governmental audits. Being a member of GAQC lowers the risk score for auditors because it's an indicator that the firm is taking additional steps to improve the quality of their work. We have found through our work that member firms tend to have fewer audit quality deficiencies. And additionally, you have to pay to be a member, so it's a sign that the firm is invested, no pun intended, in this kind of work. Okay, great. So now let's talk about what the process might look like if you were selected for one of our audits. So for our external audits, the audit process takes about a year from engagement memo to the final report. So the OIG will initiate the audit with the engagement letter and the entrance conference with the auditee or with the IPA firm if we are contracting with one. And then the auditors will go conduct their field work. So after the field work, we create a discussion draft where the auditee has a chance to informally respond to the report. We summarize any findings that we might have and potential recommendations from the field work. And our goal in this process is that there are no surprises. So the auditee will be aware of anything that's in the report and again has the opportunity to respond. And then we will have the exit conference. And that is where we will provide the formal draft or official draft report. And here the auditee has a chance to formally respond to this report. So the auditee has 30 days to respond to the draft report, which is incorporated into the final report in its entirety. So then our next step is that final report being issued. So the final report will be sent to the award recipient, NSF, and Congress, as well as posted on our website, which is where you can find all of our reports that have been issued. And if you're a single audit, who was selected to be a part of our quality assurance review, it's a much faster process. It usually involves 2 weeks of on-site work. Our goal is to have a 3-month review process from the start of on-site work to issuance of final report. So resulting letters and reports are provided to the awardees, auditors, the federal funding agencies, and when applicable, to pass-through entities. So again, for this process, for those in step 5, the auditor usually needs 2 weeks instead of the 30 days to respond to the draft report because it is in shorter length. It's a shorter report. So additionally, participation of the grant recipients, again, for our single audits, is limited to steps 1 and 6, as the recipients will receive a copy of the engagement letter and the final report. The recipient may be contacted during the field work, which is performed between steps 2 and 3, but generally are not involved in the discussion or the field work or the formal draft report. So again, just wanted to highlight the audit communication process for our single audits as well as our external audits. Okay, and then we will look at the last slide for the Office of Audits here. And I just want to highlight some of our recent work that you all might find interesting. So in January 2022, we issued our Promising Practices for NSF Award Management. And this is a capstone report based on opportunities for improvement. The most common audit findings, suggestions for how to improve compliance in those areas, and promising award management practices implemented by audited institutions through 18 completed audits. So the report is intended to help members of the recipient community identify means to strengthen award management practices and improve overall stewardship of federal funds across the NSF award recipient population. So quickly, I just want to highlight the 5 bullet points on this slide. So again, it's important to continually monitor and verify the allowability of high-risk expenses, strengthen controls over applying indirect cost rates, ensure award recipients create and maintain sufficient appropriate documentation, document and justify reasonable allocation methodologies, regularly review and update grant management policies and procedures. So with that, thank you all for your attention and for listening to me. I'm going to pass it over to my colleagues who will tell you more about the OIG Office of Investigations.
Thank you, Sarah. The Office of Investigations is tasked with the detection and prevention of fraud within the NSF's programs. Our office is comprised of criminal investigators, investigative scientists, and investigative attorneys. We derive our authority from the Inspector General Act of 1978, which authorizes us to conduct criminal, civil, and administrative investigations related to the NSF programs. While this gives us a broad mission, our primary role is first and foremost finders of fact. What this simply means is we do not independently make decisions to prosecute, but rather whether it is criminally or civilly, nor do we take a direct administrative action on our own. Instead, we present our information either to the Department of Justice or to the NSF in administrative matters. And it is they who determine the action to take. Essentially, in a criminal case, the burden of proof is beyond a reasonable doubt. The evidence presented must reach 99.99% proof positive that the allegations are supported. Whereas in a civil matter, the burden of proof is merely a preponderance of the evidence, 51% or more, meaning it is more likely than not that the allegations occurred. Administratively, the OIG writes a report recommending that NSF take some sort of action, also based on the preponderance of the evidence. Most cases we investigate are what we commonly refer to as white-collar crimes, such as the ones listed on this slide. Generally speaking, Title 18 of the United States Code is our Bible that outlines what each crime is and the elements needed to prove that a crime occurred. We will touch on some of these later, but let's discuss a few here. For instance, avoiding conflicts of interest. Avoiding the conflicts of interest is paramount and intended to protect the integrity of the merit review process, as well as to ensure the award process is fair, unbiased, and the money goes to the best projects. A conflict of interest could involve bribes or kickbacks in return for selecting an awardee or sub-awardees, respectively. Duplicative funding, on the other hand, involves the receipt of grants from different agencies to do the same research. This usually involves the failure to fully disclose other funding in your current and pending support. Abuse of government funds is the spending of grant funds on personal items or activities such as trips, cars, or credit cards. Plagiarism is using others people's words and ideas without giving them credit. Falsification is when you do research that produces data, but you don't like the results, so you create different data to produce the desired results. Fabrication is when you didn't even bother to do any research. You simply made up data or results to pretend like you did work. So we receive allegations from a number of sources: principal investigators, program officers, review panelists, university administrators, collaborators, hotline calls, etc. Anyone may confidentially contact the NSF OIG. The best way is by clicking on the orange Report Fraud, Waste, or Abuse button at the top of our homepage. We'll also provide contact numbers at the end of this presentation. So after we receive an allegation, we first review the allegation to determine if there is an NSF link. If there is an NSF link, our primary job is fact-finding, and we do this by reviewing records, interviewing knowledgeable people, issuing subpoenas, and possibly even executing search warrants in criminal matters. We also may refer the matter to our audits office or another agency if their funds are also involved. In the case of research misconduct, we typically refer the investigation to the university involved, as that is a regulatory obligation and use of indirect funds. We refer civil and criminal matters to the U.S. Attorney's Office, and many of our administrative investigations, we draft a report and refer the matter to NSF for adjudication. For all of these, our goal is to protect the interests of the federal government and the U.S. taxpayers. So now, Aliza, would you please explain the next slide?
Sure, thank you. The main type of administrative matter that we handle is research misconduct. These investigations are governed by NSF's regulation, which defines research misconduct as fabrication, falsification, and plagiarism. A finding of research misconduct requires there to be a significant departure from accepted practices of the relevant research community, that the research misconduct be committed with culpable level of intent, meaning intentionally or knowingly or recklessly, and not simply an honest error. And the allegation must be proven by a preponderance of the evidence. Other types of cases that we investigate are conflicts of interest and violations of confidentiality in NSF's merit review process, or violations by NSF-funded researchers or institutions of rules regarding research on human subjects. We also investigate whistleblower retaliation claims, which we'll discuss a bit later in the presentation. I'll now turn it over to Elisabeth to tell you some more about civil and criminal cases.
Thank you, Aliza. What we have here on this slide are a few of the statutes we see most frequently violated. We're going to go through a few case studies later on so you can see exactly what kind of conduct led to prosecution under these statutes. But really, the devil is in the details. As Mike mentioned, we are fact finders. So what we are trying to determine is, what did the person or company say that they do and then didn't do? Or what did they say they would not do and did anyway? Here we have a statute, conspiracy. That's going to be where two or more parties are involved with a crime. One that we also see frequently is criminal false statements or false claims. I think the most known example of this is Martha Stewart, who, as we know from the news stories, was investigated for insider trading. Eventually, they could not prove beyond a reasonable doubt that she had committed that crime, but they could prove that she lied to federal agents. And so she was eventually charged under 18 U.S.C. 1001, which is false statements. Another statute that we use is the Civil False Claims Act. This is when a grantee or an entity claims money that they were not entitled to. So occasionally this will have to do with certifications, but anytime a drawdown is made that someone was not entitled to, that constitutes a false claim under this statute. That's a civil statute, so it's really all about making the government whole, money damages and recoveries. And under that statute, the Department of Justice is able to get treble damages. That's triple the amount of the claim plus penalties. And then finally, one that we frequently see are mail and wire fraud. And that doesn't have just to do with the wiring of money. It's really any action that furthers a crime using the internet or the U.S. Postal Service. You will frequently see guilty pleas to a wire fraud When that happens, it's more likely than not that there were more serious crimes investigated, but that the subject ended up working a deal with the Department of Justice for lesser charges. We have a number of investigative outcomes that occur after an allegation comes in and we work the case. We, as Mike mentioned, refer these cases to other authorities, for example, the Department of Justice. Civil or criminal matters may result in prosecution, could result in a settlement agreement or a compliance agreement, fines, reimbursements, or even incarceration. Administrative matters are generally referred to the NSF, and those may result in suspension or termination of awards, the requirement to submit certifications or assurances, an imposition of a suspension or a debarment, which is for a defined period of time rather than indefinite, and reprimands and retractions. We also will refer items of interest to the OIG Office of Audits. And now Mike and Aliza will discuss some investigation case studies.
So the next few slides, we're going to discuss a couple of case studies. Our jurisdiction follows NSF funds. So we generally have 100 civil or criminal investigations underway at any given time. If you are interested beyond these case studies today, you can always read our semi-annual report to Congress. So in this first case, the NSF OIG contracted an outside CPA firm to audit the university. Auditors identified salary transactions with insufficient and or no supporting documentation. Because auditors questioned those charges, the NSF could subsequently disallow them, requiring the university repay the money. So in preparation for the audit and in response to the preliminary audit findings, the university employees fabricated time and effort records and provided them to the auditors. The university's research compliance coordinator noticed that supporting documentation was missing. So the coordinator directed PIs to submit backdated personnel activity reports based on their salary amounts that had been paid. In emails, staff were directed to please gather and create these specific items for them. I need these 13 timesheets. Make sure they are signed and dated for the current month that he is requiring. So university administrators tasked the coordinator with providing the missing reports. The coordinator emailed those whose reports were missing and directed them to complete the forms to comply with the amounts charged to the awards as if they were done before the audit began. The coordinator ensured that her administrative colleagues were apprised of her efforts. Sometimes the forms were backdated, sometimes the signature dates were omitted, and the coordinator filled them in. Some dates the coordinator corrected. For example, she made 9s into 8s. Sometimes the coordinator used previously completed reports, copied them, used whiteout, and typed or wrote different dates in. There was $540,000 in question cost, including direct salaries, fringe, and indirect. So the university's compliance coordinator was only charged with a misdemeanor rather than a felony because she did not personally benefit from the scheme. Additionally, submissions of fabricated documents and undocumented salary costs constitutes a violation of Civil False Claims Act. Ultimately, the government and the university reached a $1.17 million settlement, including a 5-year compliance plan. The university's compliance coordinator pled guilty to one count of official certificate or writings, which is a violation of 18 USC 1018, and sentenced to 1 year probation. So in this next case, the university had a pattern and practice of paying students to perform unrelated PhD required teaching assistant duties and charging the expenses to federal research grants. Because the teaching assistant duties were unallocable, they were unallowable under federal grant requirements. According to information provided by the university, a teaching assistant fund was ultimately put into place at the university to correct the problem. This case was brought to the U.S. Attorney's Office and accepted for civil prosecution. A settlement was reached totaling $3.75 million to resolve allegations that the university violated the Civil False Claims Act. So in this next case, the PI was convicted of conspiring to commit federal grant fraud, making false statements, and obstruction by falsification. The PI had undisclosed foreign funding in U.S. grant applications and submissions to the university. Some of the red flags include the PI putting in for conflicts of interest with the university that were not allowed. Also, the PI disclosed to the university travel and conferences. The university disallowed these activities, but he went anyway. And there were subawards to the university that weren't paid. These were red flags the university could have followed up on. According to the evidence, the PI, while a professor, founded and served as an officer for a company that was solely funded through federal grants. He also held an outside position at a Chinese institution. He caused the company to submit fraudulent grant proposals to NSF for research he knew had already been completed in China. When subpoenaed for records, he provided falsified timesheets to the OIG. The PI was found guilty of conspiracy, 3 counts of false statements, and obstruction by falsification. He was sentenced to time served, which was 3 months in pretrial house arrest and 2 years supervised release. So in this next case, there were multiple NSF awards for high energy particle physics research. Without adequate documentation, the university approved advances and made other payments using NSF award funds, including salary, equipment, and travel. They did so knowing at least some of the funds were used to pay a professor's personal expenses. They failed to notify the NSF of significant problems for more than 2 years. So under the Civil False Claims Act, the university paid $2.7 million to resolve the allegations that they had failed to account for NSF research funds. They also entered into a 5-year compliance plan. So a little FYI, the federal government grant regulations require universities to exercise control and oversight over the NSF award funds they receive. Among other things, a recipient of NSF award funds must have documentation of salary payments, purchases of equipment, travel, expenses, and all other items charged to the award. The regulations limits cash advances to the recipient's immediate cash needs. So additionally, the regulation requires universities to notify the NSF of any significant problems relating to the financial management of the awards. So Elisa, could you explain this next case study, please?
Sure, thank you. So I'm going to provide a couple of case studies that involve administrative investigations. In this case, an NSF-supported graduate student falsified data, plagiarized another researcher's dissertation, and committed ethical violations in a manuscript, which 2 journals published. This graduate student actually submitted manuscripts without his co-author's knowledge or consent, submitted manuscripts to 7 journals simultaneously, and even falsified a journal submission page by using false email addresses for his co-authors. This student never took responsibility for his actions. He blamed a hostile work environment, improper supervision, lack of responsible and ethical conduct of research training, even though the university records showed that he had taken it. He blamed a canceled meeting, an advisor's lack of interest, basically everybody and everything except for himself. He felt that he just deserved a publication after synthesizing compounds for his advisor. The university conducted an accurate and thorough investigation into the matter and concluded that research misconduct in the form of falsification and plagiarism occurred. The student was dismissed from the university. The publications were retracted. And one thing we like to see, which was great, was that the university took these lessons and applied them to recommending and implementing training for more students to learn what not to do. Again, that's like an outcome we like to see, where a university takes something that happens and looks at it in a more global way of how can we prevent this. OIG recommended a research misconduct finding, 3 years debarment, 6-year certifications and assurances, and NSF agreed with our recommendation. In this next case study, not only do we find plagiarism, but we also find a merit review violation. So a reviewer copied material from an NSF proposal that he reviewed into his own NSF proposal that he submitted as a PI. Like with the other case, the subject's institution was involved, but in contrast to the other case, this PI accepted responsibility. He acknowledged that he had copied the material into his proposal. The university required that the PI submit plagiarism reports for proposals and papers for 3 years and complete training. We made recommendations, and the Office of the Director accepted our recommendations. So the government interests were protected by a 2-year debarment of the PI and 5 years of certifications and assurances. The PI was also prohibited from serving as an NSF reviewer, advisor, consultant, or rotator. NSF also returned a pending proposal without review due to the research misconduct finding. I'm going to take this opportunity also to just mention something briefly about the NSF requirement for responsible and ethical conduct of research training. That was recently expanded to include NSF-funded faculty, in addition to NSF-funded students and postdocs. Our office actually completed this report not that long ago, where we looked at 10 years of plagiarism case data. 80% of our cases are plagiarism related. And we found that subjects who committed the plagiarism were often employed in junior academic positions, with assistant professor being the most frequent. So maybe this newer, this increase in the RECR training for faculty might hopefully, help prevent some of these kinds of misconduct that my side of the shop sees all too often. Elisabeth, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you. On this slide, we've listed some best practices. Read and know the applicable grant regulations, rules, know what the rules are when you're receiving federal funds, provide and document training. We recommend training for everyone that handles any federal awards, including PIs, administrative staff, financial staff. As Aliza mentioned, NSF now requires NSF-supported students, postdocs, and faculty to take responsible and ethical conduct of research training. Maintain adequate documentation to support all of the expenditures, including cost share. Do that during your award and not after the fact. Ensure your financial reporting matches your financial records. Do not spend award funds post-expiration for the purposes that are unrelated to the award. Do not provide inaccurate information or false certifications to the grantee institution or the federal agency. And if you notice an issue, make sure that you're self-disclosing that in a timely fashion. When in doubt, and I cannot stress this enough, if you have questions related to compliance with grant terms, allowable costs, or other matters, please ask your program officer, get their advice in writing, and follow it. A core value of OIG is protecting NSF employees, contractors, award recipients, and subrecipients who step forward to identify potential wrongdoing. Federal law prohibits retaliation for providing information to our office that is reasonably believed to provide evidence of a violation of a law, rule, or regulation, gross mismanagement, gross waste of funds, abuse of authority, or a substantial and specific danger to public health and safety. NSF contractors and grantees also enjoy these protections if they make their disclosures to their management, to OIG, or to Congress. You can find more information about the protections on our webpage. You should also feel free to contact our whistleblower ombudsman, Bill Kilgallen. He can provide additional information about prohibitions against retaliation for protected disclosures and rights and remedies if that has occurred. Please note that the law does not allow the whistleblower protection coordinator to act as a legal representative, agent, or advocate, merely to answer questions and show you the way. I'll turn it over to Sarah to conclude.
Okay, great. And lastly, we just ask that you keep in touch. For other questions or to report wrongdoing, you can contact our office via the email or the phone numbers here on the slide, or you can go through our website. The best way to report fraud, waste, or abuse is through that orange button on our website right there. So the link to this presentation will be available afterwards if you wish to come back to this slide or any of our slides for information. And on the next slide, we will provide our individual email addresses if you would like to reach out to us individually. We hope that this overview of what the NSF Office of Inspector General does has been useful, and we look forward to answering your questions. Thank you all.
Thank you all, and thank you for your presentation. I'd like to welcome my colleagues back. We do have some time left for Q&A, and thank you for answering all those questions in the Q&A during the presentation. Much appreciated. We do have some time, and we've identified a few questions that we think will be beneficial to the larger group. And so I'm just going to go through some of these until time runs out. The first one is, you spoke a little bit about this, but can you talk a little more about what might cause an institution to be prioritized for an audit by the OIG?
Yeah, so again, I did, like Jeremy said, this was touched on in the presentation. There's a lot of different factors that might lead us to choosing a specific institution. Again, it's looking at, what is Congress looking at? What is NSF looking at? Sort of as we gather for like our audit plan. And so once we get the general theme, then we have our audit plan that will be up on our website, but then going down into like the nitty-gritty of choosing the institutions. So that's going to look different for each audit and depending on, what we're sort of looking at. But again, reference this in the presentation, but it's looking at, the drawdown patterns, the number of NSF awards, the value of NSF awards, the specific NSF award, if we're doing, one of those hybrid audits. And then as well as like single audit findings. And so, we collect all of this relevant information and then do some data analytics to put into our risk model to kind of like then narrow it down on an institution that we think would, benefit from an audit, and that NSF would maybe benefit from it as well.
Okay, great, thank you. Can you speak to whether there are other government research funding agencies that have comparable OIG audit programs?
I had actually mentioned that I wanted to jump on this question because when it came in, I wasn't entirely sure what component the person was talking about, but I wanted to use it as an opportunity to mention that NSF OIG is actually unique in its function of investigating allegations of research misconduct and that component, that function within our office. There is a comparable agency or part of an agency, the Office of Research Integrity, within the health, HHS, Health and Human Services, that does a similar kind of process of reviewing things for research misconduct. But our office is the only OIG that handles research misconduct matters officially. If anyone else wants to jump in about other kinds of audit programs.
Anyone? No? Okay. Let's move on to the next question. We had a question. So do you have recommendations for using artificial intelligence, AI, for proposals and any resulting plagiarism concerns?
So this is a very hot topic, which is why I wanted to address it in this kind of way. We get questions related to AI and plagiarism a lot. What I can say is that, using AI there's no rules right now within our office about people using it or not using it for writing proposals. It can be used, people use it sometimes as tools. But what I will say is that one cannot blame AI if plagiarism is identified in a proposal that one submits. So the definition of plagiarism does not change in the face of AI. If a proposal is submitted that contains text that is copied without appropriate citation, you used AI, it is on you. It is on the person who submitted the proposal. That person will be the one who has to take responsibility for it. So, more generally, is there any specific rule right now within our office about using it, not using it? I mean, there isn't, but that is not an excuse and doesn't change the definition of plagiarism.
Great, thank you. So we had a couple of questions about addressing efficiency improvements at NSF. And so I guess in summarizing these questions, does the OIG, or how does the OIG work with NSF to address improvements, whether it be in the proposal preparation and submission phases of a faculty member, or in the award management area as well? How does the OIG work with NSF in that regard?
So I will say that the vast majority of recommendations that we make related to economy and efficiency have to do with processes within NSF itself, and less so with the application process. I know Jeremy inserted a publication in there. We do have to comply with the Paperwork Reduction Act, but most of our recommendations, and I'll open this up to the group in case there's anything I'm missing, have to do with ways for NSF itself to be more efficient, to save taxpayer dollars that come in.
And yeah, just to follow up on that is a similar again for the Office of Audits. And I can't speak too much on this in the sense that, again, I have 1 year of experience in this position and I am getting a better understanding, but we do, have internal audits where we audit NSF's programs and how they're running them. And so again, our recommendations are improving NSF's procedures and processes.
Great, thank you. We have a question asking whether the bad acts of a single investigator impact that individual, or does that also have repercussions for the institution that has submitted the proposal and in case of an award, receives the award?
So as the lawyer in the group, I have to start with it depends. Really, if we have a bad actor PI, we have a number of tools that we can use to protect taxpayer dollars. One of those is suspension and debarment. If we find that a PI is not presently responsible. If the university has a lack of oversight, though, if the university should have been looking into invoices, should have noticed that something was not exactly as it should have been, or any other entity, it's possible to extend a suspension and debarment recommendation to an entity. That is, if the entity is responsible for oversight and they are not doing their job there. With respect to for how long, it really depends on how bad the conduct is. We've had some that have lasted upwards of, I'd say, 5 or 6 years, but generally they are no longer than 2 or 3 or even 1 year debarments.
Anybody else want to chime in on that? Okay, getting back to AI, there's a question asking if the NSF OIG uses AI to assist in identifying fraud, waste, and abuse.
And I think, unfortunately, we're going to have to decline to answer that question. We don't really go into our investigative techniques.
Gotcha. I don't see any other questions in the Q&A at the moment. I don't know if there's anything else that you wanted to bring up, or anything that you felt you left out or wanted to bring up before we end the presentation.
I do see one other question that just came in.
Oh, okay. Yes. What does 1 year of certifications and assurances mean?
I'll jump on that one. So certifications means that one has to submit a document with a submission to NSF. So when you submit a proposal to NSF or a report to NSF, a document that certifies that that document contains no fabrication, falsification, or plagiarism. Okay. Assurances is sort of like a level up. Somebody else has to review that document and basically sign off saying that they've reviewed it, and they can assure that this document does not contain fabrication, falsification, or plagiarism. So there are two kinds of administrative actions that can be taken, primarily within a research misconduct context.
Okay, next question I see. If PIs don't properly disclose conflict of interest or outside funding to the university when asked, can the institution be held liable if found out later?
Again, it depends. If the university should have known, and I answered in one of the questions, we talked a little bit about the difference between a knowing violation and some of the other violations. For a civil case, what the government would need to show is something called reckless disregard, which is essentially the ostrich with its head in the sand. So if the university was doing that, was deliberately just trying not to see what was going on behind the curtain, it's entirely possible that the institution could have some civil liability. But we don't see those cases very frequently. If the university is asking for something, I think, and they are within their rights to believe that they are getting what they asked for, then it would be reasonable for them to assume that they were getting the accurate information, and then that would be a tough case.
Great. Well, let me just take this opportunity to thank all of you for attending this session. And I want to thank my colleagues today for participating and presenting this information and answering questions. And thank you for attending. Take care. Bye-bye.